Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to have a look at design movements. So in a previous recent video we had a look at designers and their work. They go hand in hand. It would have been too long of a video to do it in one long one, but it is important to sort of like separate them a little bit as well. So it is going to be on paper 2 of your exam paper, the hour and a half long one. So what you need to do is basically, there are a lot more design movements than the ones I'm going to show you. Okay, this isn't like finished list. But these are the ones that AQA, the exam board, have said that you need to make sure you're aware of for the exam papers. All right, so what you need to know is what their sort of style is, what their sort of design philosophy or belief is, and then what sort of influence have they had on modern day society, basically. If you have a copy of the AQA textbook, it is on page 196 to 202. So what you need to know, as I said, is basically who they are, what the most famous designs are, similar to designs and the work, but also understanding what sort of influence on the times they've had, sort of changes in major developments in technology, key aspects associated to designers that work with them. So it is all well and good forming your own opinions on design movements and specific designers, because that's what you should be doing. You are an A-level student studying product design, and some of you are going to go off to university to study architecture design of some kind, so obviously you should be forming your own opinions. I am aware that when I do my theory lessons, my own opinion does go into it. Apple. All joking aside, yeah, it's important that you understand you understand how to explain why you like a certain design and why you don't, because a lot of it is down to personal preference. It is, but you need to be able to put a coherent argument together about why you like one and why you don't like one. But having said that, while you are doing that, while you are forming your opinions, there's a few other things you need to take into consideration before you start judging them. All right. So the first one, probably the most important one, really, is the context of the time at which it was prominent. So what was going on at the time of when that design movement was popular? Okay. For example, World War Two. So with World War Two, obviously issues around that being you're looking at shortages of certain materials, or they're starting to develop, like mass production starting to become a thing. You got ones in the 60s, so then you have like the space race, because obviously like America went to the moon. Everyone think we're going to go live on the moon or live on Mars, or even worse, hippies. Um, I also got things like major developments in technology. So obviously we've done that as a previous video and a various theories, so do have a look at that as well. So that could be to do with things like microelectronics, so things getting smaller, so that you've got more creativity because it's more portable and you don't need to have as much space taking up the functionality of how something actually physically works. It could also be to do with how the thing's actually manufactured itself, so you've got more creativity to it, you can get more complex shapes to it. It's gotten fast to be able to produce something, or a change of material, so it no longer has to be like handcrafted, that sort of thing. Um, those are like the two main sort of ones that you got to consider. Then obviously you need to make sure you understand the key sort of features that are associated with that design group or designers, which I'll go through, and then how they've affected, or what's their knock-on effect on modern day society. Do you still sort of see any work inspired by them like now? So obviously watching this video, filming this video now, we're in 2022. I had to check that then. But it doesn't matter when you're watching the video, really, is that obviously some things, like, it comes in waves of popularity, but you will always see really, really popular design movements will never completely disappear. So what sort of long-lasting effects can you sort of see them having? Okay, so we'll start from the beginning. Arts and crafts movements. So this encompasses things like Art Nouveau, which I'm assuming you probably will have covered a little bit at GCSE. If you've done things like art, I'm hoping you've covered it as well. So this lasted from about 1880 to about 1920, right around sort of just before war. So it started in England, but then it very, very quickly spread into Europe and then into America. So they had a really big appreciation of the natural beauty of materials. So having like natural grains, like of timber, so not really covering like paints and things, like keeping like these nice dark colours. They didn't believe in altering materials in a big way. They really resented the idea of making things by machines, because they thought that sort of hid the aesthetic beauty of it. They believed it should be handcrafted. So excuse me. In the major developments in technology video, I talked about when we did the microelectronics and the radio, and when that first radio came out in the 1940s, and they were handcrafted things that were considered like a work of art. That was very much an arts and crafts movement style product because they believed, okay, this beautiful material should be made by an incredibly skilled craftsman, and if it was not done that way, it sort of cheapened it a little bit. So they liked the idea of like that craftsmanship, and they thought machining things was sort of cheating, and it sort of got rid of the beauty of it as well. The Industrial Revolution in Britain during the end of the 18th century into the 19th century, they did start to lean a little bit more towards modern manufacturing, but still nothing was getting like mass produced at the time. They still like the when I talk about like modern manufacturing, I mean they started to use machines to sort of form shapes a little bit rather than having everything like chiseled and like formed and that sort of thing. But yeah, they still didn't like the idea of mass production in the sense of we just get machines to CNC. Obviously, well, CNC wasn't a thing back then anyway, but they didn't like that idea of you can just sort of like conveyor belt it over and over and over again. So most common sort of designers that are associated with them are William Morris is the most famous one, CFA Voisey and Richard Norman Shaw. Okay, so those are three really common ones. Sort of, you do see this quite a lot still in like really, really fancy sort of like hotels, bed and breakfasts, those sorts of things. You see it a lot in, not so much anymore, but if you'd have seen like, well, I won't give my opinion, but they'll set like carpets and curtain designs that sort of had these sort of patterns, which at the time were considered very, very pretty, but didn't age super well. And we do start to see it a little bit more modern in well, particularly in things like tattooing as well. I think people getting like portrait tattoos sort of have that sort of style of like the side profile of like a beautiful woman with like natural like flowers and vines and those sorts of things coming along with it as well. Art Deco. So this came straight after the 1920s and 30s. So a lot of this is mainly like architecture was the most common sort of thing. So they think like skyscrapers in New York, like jazz cafes in Paris, apartment buildings in Bombay, and then it did go into like ceramics, metals, and graphic works in Japan. So it literally was all over the place. Originally, so that their entire inspiration came from the same sort of time in 1922. Tutankhamun, the pharaoh in Egypt. They discovered the tomb. They basically all the imagery they found in that tomb. People like involved in Art Deco absolutely loved. Obviously, like Egypt were very extra. They like gold all over the place. They had these sort of like step sort of patterns, and that was very much inspired. No, that very much inspired Art Deco. Sorry, they weren't inspired by Art Deco because that was a long, long time before. So his key sort of features of that were like sunburst motifs. So the idea that you had like a central sort of circly point. So if you look at like this building here, so they have like this sort of centrally sort of idea, and then you have like those little sunburst sort of rays coming out. They liked a lot of, particularly in architecture, quite a bit. They like the ziggurats. I think I'm saying that right, which is like the step pyramid sort of look. Again, you can sort of see that same sort of thing in this building we've got going here. This has sort of got everything in there. And they like the simple geometric patterns and forms. They didn't like overly complex, um, busy sort of shapes and patterns. Um, he's still, well, obviously because the buildings are still there. Like yeah, big skyscrapers, particularly in like New York, is quite a big thing. There's some inspiration of that in London as well. If you watched movies like The Wolf of Wall Street, a lot of the buildings they have in them have got that sort of style as well. Same with if you ever watched what's the Mad Men on Netflix. I think it's on Netflix. Around that sort of time, yeah, they have a lot of the Art Deco style as well. So, most famous designers and contributors are Clarice Cliff, Aileen Gray, Alvar Aalto, and Walter Darwin Teague. All right, so modernism. So, modernism is a bit of a general term that sort of encompasses a couple of different design movements within it. So, if you talk about like the original sort of arts and crafts movement, Art Deco, there was still obviously Art Deco was using machinery because you're not making massive things like that by hand. But they still sort of like the natural beauty of sort of things, and arts and crafts were very much like no, it must all be beautifully made by hand. You must appreciate the material, you must appreciate the process to make this beautiful product. Whereas modernism, as the name sort of implies, is they're like, no, this is modern. We're in the future. We want to start like modernizing what we're doing. So um, basically, so this founded at the end of the First World War. So that's when we're starting to get a bit modern because that's when things like mass production are starting to become a thing because obviously they need to produce equipment for the war. Um, so basically what they were starting to do was rejecting ornament or like basically patterns for the sake of patterns and like being pretty for the sake of being pretty, like having all these things that aren't really doing very much. So they sort of go to like sort of minimalism sort of idea where not trying to be too busy. And by busy, what I mean is just having loads of things just stuck all over the place. All right. So modernism is described as like the single most important new style of philosophy of architecture and design of the 20th century. They like the idea of volume, asymmetrical compositions, and minimal ornamentation. So the first one, which we're currently looking at, is Distijl, which is Dutch, and it's Dutch. I know my Dutch is terrible, but that is Dutch for the style. That's the only Dutch words I know, because why would I know anything else? So you may have seen these before. So they really like basic rectangular like forms and straight edges. It's all primary colours, and they like the abstract pieces. So they look pretty, but they don't really work very well. Um, which I know is a bit of a oxymoron when you're talking about the fact that we said we're rejecting like decorative pieces. But what that means is like having excess decoration on the pieces. But it's like things like these chairs, if you sit on them, they are not comfortable to sit on. They are like decorative designs as it is. Um, and basic designs are sort of asymmetrical, so you can sort of cut them in half and they kind of like mirror over. Um, So the most common ones are JJP Oat. I'm going to butcher all of these names. Pierre Piet Mondrain, Dret Riedveld, and Robert van Hoff. I think I got that last one right. So that is Distill. So that is still relatively popular. If you've ever watched programs like Modern Family, which I'm pretty sure has just finished filming, in one of the couple of characters' houses, they've actually got Distill patterns in their housing. So it's still somewhat prevalent, definitely less so nowadays. And then part of modernism as well, you got Bauhaus. Now, Bauhaus was founded in Germany in 1919. Now, remember what I said at the start of the video is you have to be aware of the times, excuse me, what's going on at the time. Okay. Now, Bauhaus was around for a long time, still is sort of around for a long time. They like the idea of being true to material and not having patterns on it or decoration for the sake of it. But they sort of took it a lot further than Distill did. They were very much the idea of form as follows function is that they were very much of the things will work well. If we're having a chair, it's going to be a comfortable chair. If we're going to have a product, it's going to work very well, and then that'll decide how it looks as well. Rather than making something pretty, and then I don't really care if it's comfortable. I don't really care if it functions. Whereas they're like, no, it will function correctly, and then it will look good afterwards. So they very much embrace the idea of the machine age. So very much any time or any new manufacturing method, Bauhaus were very much up for using. So they did a lot of metal work. It was a lot of chrome metal frames with like metal leather and that sort of thing. That was very much their aesthetic was chrome and black for the most part. They like the geometrical patterns that were taken from Art Deco. So you do see a lot of these design movements sort of taking inspiration from previous generations and then twisting it into their own sort of way. Um, so there's a few sort of like mantras they went by. The first one is form follows function, which comes up a lot. So make sure you're aware of that and what it means. So it's the idea that it works well, and then that's the most important feature, and then function. So function is the most important thing, and then how it looks afterward is like not an afterthought because it still needs to be pretty, um, but the function is more important. And then everyday products for everyday people. So they're not making things stupidly expensive, unaffordable for people at the time of night, like when they were active, and not making it something that is going to sit in the corner and not be used. So after World War One, they were keen to embrace all those manufacturing techniques. Obviously, things like mass production. Um, that's again one of the reasons why they sort of kept away from decorative parts because it meant keeping it a minimalist sort of idea meant it was easier to mass produce because the pieces were more simple. This chair, and I should know the name of it because it's incredibly famous, but it's actually one of the most comfortable chairs you'll sit on. It is really, really nice. New ones, well, not new, but originals are incredibly expensive now. You can buy replicas. Seeing that sort of modern society, I don't suppose because obviously we are based in the south of England. Um, but if you are into the sport of rugby league, which most people down south aren't, they have the Super League show, which is essentially like match of the day, but for rugby league, and they all sit in those chairs, and they're all very comfortable. Um, at the time, they were considered a bit. what's the word? Uh, Not confrontational, but a bit controversial would be the word. Because people didn't like the fabrication of metal that they were using. Obviously, because we talk like Art Nouveau, and they're like, "Oh, this must all be done by hand, by a beautiful timber, blah 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 blah." Whereas Bauhaus like, no, 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 we are going to embrace the technology. We're going to make it all. So at the time, they were sort of rebellious, but actually, the more they did it, the more people thought, actually, no, it looks very nice. It works very, very well. They did start to then introduce things like bent plywood as well. So that's where you got people like Charlie and Ray with the loungers and those sorts of things as well. Streamlining. So this design philosophy was seen quite early, so like in the early 1920s, where aerodynamics had just started to like be thought about to do like car bodies for design, that sort of things. So it's a whole idea of like flowing curves, smooth exteriors, and chrome detailing, along with using like modern materials, obviously metals, bakelite, that sort of thing. They did like obviously most commonly using things like cars, but I also did like to do like household objects, so like kettles and irons and those sort of things. All these nice flowing sort of looks to it. Um, and then obviously in this modern age, you still see a lot of like streamlined sort of things, and because it wouldn't be a video without me trying to get F1 in there as well, you can obviously see the effects like of streamlining and aerodynamics be used in modern day society, with designs of sports cars and like racing cars. So most common names, obviously, feel like Raymond Lowery, Norman Belgadis, and Henry Dreyfus. But Raymond Lowery is very, very famous. Oh, I forgot to mention with modernism, with Bauhaus. I went through. I can't remember if I mentioned those names or not. Marianne Brandt is one of the most famous, but the most famous one is probably Dieter Rams, who we talked about in the previous video on designers and their work with these 10 principles of good design. So if you can know any of those ones, Dieter Rams is the one you absolutely should know, and then Marianne Brandt because she did like the household like kitchen accessories, kitchen pots and pans and those sorts of things. Okay, and then you got postmodern. So you had pre-modern, which isn't really the term for it, but originally like your Art Decos and your arts and crafts movements. Then, which was before modernism, and then you had modernism, who then decided to embrace like new technologies, new materials, those sort of things. And then you got postmodern. So they were most prevalent in the 1970s and 80s, and their entire mantra was just let's go crazy. Let's just be different for the sake of being different. Let's be rebellious. Um, Not a fan, personally. I don't like the idea of being weird for the sake of being weird. It irritates me. But it's down to you to form your opinion. If you're talking about like good functioning products, arguably what I would say is that, oh, sorry, Bauhaus is probably the best design movement slash design school to sort of base your design philosophy around. Whereas Memphis literally went down the whole idea. No, let's just go crazy. So they literally just bold, bright colours everywhere, simple juxtaposition of geometric forms, which means they just had random shapes and just stuck them in random directions, basically. They like the idea of, I'm going to get these terms, anthropomorphic, which is giving human traits to objects and making things look like humans, and then zoomorphic, which is giving animal traits to characteristics, and characteristics to shapes as well. They're not functional. They're not comfortable in any way. They are not useful to use, but they're supposed to be like fun. Um, they are supposed to just be the exact opposite to the idea of things like Bauhaus, because Bauhaus had just been, and it was all about being sensible, nice, quality, good working design, and they just sort of like, I want to stand out. It's like the rebellious, like youngest child that just wants to go crazy and paint their face and go ah. No, I'm being a bit silly, obviously, but they're very popular. Um, just not my own personal taste, if I'm being honest. So main designers, Ettore Sortas is the most famous one that will come out of Memphis. Then you got Mark Neeson and Danny Lane. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of questions. So there are quite a few, but I'll try to just take two just to sort of like make it a little bit easier. So state three characteristics associated with the products from the Memphis postmodern design group. So, first of all, 3 marks, super simple. 3 marks, 3 things. The only thing you got to do is you got to make sure you know who Memphis is, and obviously it's the last one we've just gone over in the video. Pause the video, give yourself 3 minutes, and then we'll go for the answer. Okay, so dead easy. Things like bold colours, simple geometric patterns, zoomorphic or anthropomorphic form to create friendly designs. I keep using this word friendly in quotation marks. It's annoying. 3D like works of art rather than being functional products. Unconventional, seen as being a rebellion to modernism. So any of those would have been fine. So you just need 3 of them. And last one, using an appropriate product example, explain how it conforms to the theory of form follows function in your answer. You should refer to a specific design movement. So, 4 marks. Note that it's giving you a few different rules you need to follow here. 1, you need a product example. And remember that when it says you need a product example, picking a bad example is going to be shooting yourself in the foot. All right? So make sure you pick a good example you know enough to talk about. As I said, you need to talk about a specific design movement. Now, there is one design movement I've gone through in this video already that specifies specifically about form as follows function being like their mantra. Okay, and then obviously you've got to make sure that they conform. I've just said that as follows for the function. Right, 4 marks. Pause the video. Give yourself 4 minutes, and we'll look for the answer. Okay, so hopefully you figured out that form follows function was sort of the mantra of Bauhaus. So examples would have been like chairs, toothbrushes, radios, those sorts of things. Okay, so basically what you need to talk about is the fact that form follows functions, lack of decorative parts, like minimalist sort of design where something works well before it functions. So you get a point for figuring out that it is Bauhaus. If you can mention data realms, that would be amazing. But then make sure you mention. So a point for mentioning that it's Bauhaus/data realms. A good example gets you another point, explaining how its form follows function. You could actually think about it as we're just talking through it, go with, and it pains me to say it, Apple, and like the iPod, because that's quite a simple design, and Data Realm says that Apple were actually following his design philosophy quite well. So as long as it's a product, basically what you can't have is a super decorative product that's got loads of excess bits hanging off it, because that's the opposite of form follows function. Okay, that is the end of designers and their work. No, that's not. It's the end of design movements. If you've got any questions, let me know.